The saloon stank of whiskey and shame. Mara Colton stood on the auction block, hands bound, while men placed bets on how much her father's debt would sell her for. 300 pounds of woman nobody wanted until the mountain man walked in. Garrick Thorne didn't ask questions. He slammed down a leather pouch heavy with raw gold, and the room went silent. Everyone knew his name. Everyone feared what he'd done. But no one understood why a man like that would pay a fortune for a girl like her. That's the question that would shake the entire frontier. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The door to Callahan's saloon hung crooked on its hinges, and the February wind cut through the gaps like a knife. Mara stood on a crate behind the bar, her wrists tied with rough hemp that had already rubbed her skin raw. The room smelled like stale beer, tobacco spit, and something worse, desperation. Her father sat slumped in the corner, too drunk to meet her eyes. He'd lost everything at Victor Hale's poker table, and when the money ran out, he'd offered the only thing he had left. 300 pounds if she's an ounce, someone called from the back, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Mara's jaw tightened. She'd heard worse. She'd been hearing worse her entire life. Victor Hale stood near the bar, a slim man in an expensive coat that didn't belong in a place like this. He wore his cruelty the way other men wore hats, casually, like it didn't mean anything. His fingers drummed against the wood, and his eyes never left her. "Gentlemen," Hale said, his voice smooth as oil, "let's not waste time. The debt is $400. I'll take her off Colton's hands for $200 and consider us square." "That's half what he owes," someone protested. Hale smiled. "Then someone else can bid higher." The room stayed quiet. Nobody wanted her. That was the truth Mara had learned to carry. She was too big, too plain, too much of everything except what men valued. 200 once, Hale said. Mara's breath came shallow. She'd seen the way Hale looked at women who worked for him, the bruises they tried to hide, the dead look in their eyes. 200 twice. Her father didn't even look up. The door slammed open. Snow blew in first, then the man. He was tall, taller than anyone in the room, with shoulders that filled the doorway and a beard dark as winter pine. He wore a coat made from bear hide, and his boots left prints of mud and melted ice across the floor. His eyes swept the room once, cold and gray as the mountains he came from. The room went silent in a way it hadn't for Hale. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that came from fear. "Garrick Thorne," someone whispered. Mara had heard the name. Everyone on the frontier had. The mountain man who'd killed 6 claim jumpers with his bare hands, who'd survived 3 winters alone after his wife died, who traded in gold and furs and didn't come down from his mountain unless he had to. Garrick walked to the bar. He didn't look at Mara. He pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat and dropped it on the wood with a heavy thunk that made glasses rattle. "How much?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. Hale straightened, his smile faltering. "I'm sorry?" "For the girl. How much?" "The bid is 200. Garrick untied the pouch and dumped it out. Raw gold nuggets spilled across the bar, gleaming in the lamplight. There had to be $1,000 worth, maybe more. "That enough?" Garrick asked. Hale stared at the gold. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Everyone in the room was staring now, at the gold, at Garrick, at Mara. "Mr. Thorne," Hale said carefully, "I'm not sure you understand the situation. I understand a man selling his daughter to pay a debt. I got gold. You want it or not?" "I already have a bid." Garrick's hand moved to the knife on his belt. He didn't draw it, didn't have to. "You got a bid," Garrick said quietly. "Now you got a better one." Hale looked at the gold, then at Garrick, then at the men around the room. Nobody met his eyes. Nobody was going to help him. "She's yours," Hale said, his voice tight. Garrick scooped half the gold back into the pouch, leaving the rest on the bar. He walked to where Mara stood and cut the rope on her wrists with one stroke. His knife was sharp enough she barely felt it. "Come on," he said. Mara didn't move. She couldn't. Her mind couldn't make sense of what was happening. Men didn't buy her to be kind. They didn't pay fortunes for women like her unless they wanted something specific, something ugly. Garrick looked at her for the first time. His eyes were gray and direct, and they didn't crawl over her the way other men's did. They just looked at her like she was a person standing there. "You can walk out with me," he said, "or you can stay here with him. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice, but the fact that he'd said the words, "your choice," made something crack open in her chest. She stepped down from the crate. Her legs shook. She'd been standing there for 2 hours, and her feet had gone numb. She stumbled, and Garrick caught her elbow. His grip was firm, but not painful. He steadied her, then let go. "Get your coat," he said. "I don't have one." He looked at her dress, thin cotton that barely kept out the cold, and his jaw tightened. He shrugged off his bear hide coat and held it out. "Take it." "You'll freeze." "I got another in my pack. Take it." Mara pulled the coat around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body and smelled like pine smoke and leather. It swallowed her completely, and for the first time in years she felt hidden, protected. Garrick walked to the door, and she followed. "Thorn!" Hale called. Garrick stopped but didn't turn around. "You just made an expensive mistake," Hale said. "That girl's not worth what you paid." Garrick looked back over his shoulder. "That's my problem, not yours." They walked out into the snow. The cold hit Mara like a fist, even with the coat. The street was empty except for a massive gray horse tied to the post. Garrick untied it and swung up into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd been riding since before he could walk. He held out his hand. Mara stared at it. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "Not really." "You'll learn. Come on." She took his hand. His palm was calloused and rough, and when he pulled, she felt the strength in his arm. She got her foot in the stirrup and hauled herself up behind him. The horse shifted under her weight, but didn't protest. "Hold on," Garrick said. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. He kicked the horse into motion, and they rode out of town into the darkness. The snow fell heavier as they climbed into the foothills. Mara had never been this far from town, and everything looked strange and hostile. The trees pressed in on both sides, and the wind howled through the branches like something alive and angry. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "My cabin. About 12 miles up." 12 miles in this weather. She was already shaking, and they'd barely started. "Why did you do that?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Why did you buy me?" Garrick was quiet for a long moment. The horse's hooves crunched through the snow, steady and rhythmic. "Needed help," he said finally. "Got 3 kids. They need someone who can cook, clean, keep the cabin running. Their mother died 4 years back. We've been managing, but it's not enough." "You paid $1,000 for a housekeeper?" "Paid 400. Rest is mine." "That's still... You think you're not worth $400? The question stopped her cold. She didn't know how to answer that. Her father had valued her at nothing. Hale had valued her at 200, and only for what he could use her for. "I don't know what I'm worth," she said quietly. "Then I guess we'll figure it out." They rode in silence for another hour. Mara's fingers went numb even inside the coat, and her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue. The trail got steeper, narrower, until she couldn't see anything but snow and trees and darkness. Finally, Garrick pulled the horse to a stop. "There," he said. Mara looked up and saw a cabin built into the side of the mountain. It was bigger than she'd expected, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed behind the curtains. Garrick dismounted and helped her down. Her legs buckled when she hit the ground, and he caught her again. "You'll warm up inside," he said. He tied the horse in a lean-to shelter, then led her to the front door. He pushed it open, and warmth rushed out to meet them. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft above. A fire burned in the stone hearth, and the smell of cooking meat made Mara's stomach clench with hunger. 3 figures stood near the fire, and they all turned when the door opened. A boy, maybe 16, tall and lean, with his father's dark hair. A girl, 13 or 14, with suspicious eyes, and her arms crossed over her chest. And a younger boy, no more than 8, who stared at Mara with his mouth open. "This is Mara," Garrick said, shutting the door behind them. "She's going to be staying with us." Nobody spoke. The older boy, Eli, Mara guessed, looked her up and down with an expression she couldn't read. The girl, Nora, just stared. The little one, Ben, kept gaping. "That's Eli, Nora, and Ben," Garrick said, pointing to each. "You got questions? Ask. You got problems, say so. We don't do secrets here. Pa, Eli said slowly, what's going on? She needs a place. We need help. That's what's going on. You just brought home some random woman? Wasn't random. Now show her where she can sleep and get her something to eat. She's half frozen. Garrick walked to the far side of the cabin, where a narrow bed was pushed against the wall. He grabbed a pile of blankets and dropped them on the bed. This'll be yours, he said. It's not much, but it's warm. Mara looked at the bed. It was more than she'd had in years. Her father's house had been a shack with a dirt floor. She'd slept on a pile of straw in the corner. Thank you, she said. Garrick nodded and turned to the fire. Nora still hadn't moved. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyes dark and angry. Come on, Eli said finally. There's stew. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and handed it to her. Mara's hand shook as she took it, and some of the broth sloshed over the side. She sat down on a bench near the fire and started eating. It was venison and potatoes and carrots, and it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. Ben crept closer, still staring. Why are you so big? He asked. Ben, Eli said sharply. It's okay, Mara said quietly. She looked at the boy. I just am. Always have been. Can you fight? Ben, shut up. I'm just asking. No, Mara said. I can't fight. I don't know how to do much of anything useful, honestly, but I can learn. Nora made a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. We'll see. Garrick came back and sat down on a chair near the fire. He picked up a knife and a piece of wood and started carving, his hands moving with practiced ease. Rules are simple, he said, not looking up. You work, you eat. You don't work, you don't eat. Same as the rest of us. You want to leave? You can leave. Door's not locked. But if you stay, you pull your weight. I'll stay, Mara said, and I'll work. Good. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. Mara finished her stew and set the bowl down, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. The first week was harder than anything Mara had ever done. She woke before dawn to start the fire and make breakfast. Biscuits and salt pork and coffee so strong it could strip paint. Garrick and Eli left right after eating, heading out to check their trap lines. Nora disappeared to do chores in the lean-to, leaving Mara alone with Ben. The boy watched her constantly, his eyes following her every move. Do you know any stories? He asked while she scrubbed dishes. Not really. Mama used to tell stories about knights and dragons. I don't know any like that. Ben looked disappointed. He kicked his feet against the chair legs, a steady rhythm that made Mara's head pound. Can you teach me to read? I can't read. His eyes widened. Really? Really? That's sad. Mara scrubbed harder. Yeah, it is. Nora came back inside, her cheeks red from the cold. She looked at Ben sitting there and scowled. Why aren't you doing your chores? I finished. Then go find more. Ben sighed and trudged outside. Nora poured herself coffee and sat down at the table, watching Mara work. You're slow, she said finally. I'm learning where things go. Mama could do all this in half the time. Mara didn't answer. She just kept washing. Pa didn't need to bring you here, Nora continued. We were doing fine. Your father didn't seem to think so. Well, what do you know about what my father thinks? Mara set down the dish and turned to face the girl. Nora was thin and fierce, with her mother's delicate features and her father's hard eyes. She looked like she could start a fight with her shadow. I know he paid money he didn't have to spend to bring me here, Mara said quietly. So either he needed help or he's a fool. And he doesn't strike me as a fool. He felt sorry for you. Maybe, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm here now, and I'm going to work. So you can hate me all you want, but you're stuck with me. Nora's jaw tightened. For a second, Mara thought the girl might throw the coffee in her face. Instead, she stood up and walked to the door. You won't last a month, she said. The door slammed behind her. Mara went back to the dishes. Her hands were already cracked and bleeding from the lye soap and the cold water. She'd never had soft hands, but this was different. This was the kind of work that ground you down to nothing if you let it. She didn't intend to let it, too. Garrick came back at sunset with 2 rabbits and a string of squirrels. He gutted them outside, his movements quick and efficient, then brought them in for Mara to cook. You know how to skin game? He asked. No. He set the rabbits on the table. Come here. She walked over and he handed her a knife. First cut goes here, he said, pointing, just under the skin. You're not cutting meat yet, just separating the hide. She made the cut too deep and blood welled up. Careful. You ruined the meat we don't eat tonight. Sorry. Don't be sorry. Just do it right. He guided her hand, showing her the angle, the pressure. His hands were steady and patient, and he didn't get frustrated when she made mistakes. By the time they finished, she had 2 passable rabbit carcasses and a pile of squirrel meat. Better, he said. It was the closest thing to praise she'd gotten all week. That night, after everyone had eaten and gone to bed, Mara lay on her narrow cot and stared at the ceiling. The cabin was quiet except for the fire and the wind. She could hear Garrick breathing in his bed across the room, slow and steady. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, too big, too ugly, too much trouble. And she'd believed it because what else was she supposed to do? But Garrick hadn't looked at her like she was worthless. He'd looked at her like she was someone who could learn. Maybe that was enough to start with. The second week, Garrick started teaching her to shoot. He took her outside after breakfast, carrying his rifle and a sack of old tin cans. He set the cans on a fallen log 50 feet away, then handed her the rifle. You ever fired one of these? No. It's going to kick. Don't fight it. Let it happen. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. The first shot knocked her back a step, and the bullet went wide. The second went wider. You're jerking it, Garrick said. Breathe out and fire right at the end of the breath. She tried again. The can stayed exactly where it was. This is stupid, she muttered. Why? Because I'm never going to hit anything. Not with that attitude. He took the rifle and fired once. The can flew off the log, spinning through the air. He reloaded and handed it back to her. Again. She fired 20 more times before she finally hit one. The can jumped and she felt a surge of something she didn't recognize at first. It took her a moment to realize it was pride. Good, Garrick said. Now do it again. They practiced every day after that. Her shoulder turned purple from the recoil and her ears rang from the noise, but she kept at it. By the end of the month, she could hit 3 out of 5 cans at 50 feet. Why are you teaching me this? She asked one afternoon. Garrick was reloading, his fingers moving automatically. Because if something happens to me, you need to be able to protect yourself. And the kids. What kind of something? He looked at her, his gray eyes serious. The kind that happens out here all the time. Bears, wolves, men who think they can take what they want. You need to be ready. I'm not a fighter. No, but you're strong. And you're tougher than you think. She didn't believe him, but she wanted to. The third week, Ben fell through the ice. He'd gone down to the creek to fetch water, and the ice gave way under him. His scream cut through the afternoon like a knife, and Mara dropped the wood she was carrying and ran. She got there before anyone else. Ben was thrashing in the water, his hands clawing at the ice, his face already turning blue. The creek wasn't deep, but it was fast, and the cold would kill him in minutes. Mara didn't think. She just dropped to her stomach and crawled out onto the ice, spreading her weight as wide as she could. The ice groaned under her, cracking but not breaking. "Grab my hand!" she yelled. Ben's eyes were wild with panic. He reached for her, missed, went under. Mara lunged forward, and the ice cracked louder. Her hand closed around his wrist, and she pulled. He was heavy with the water, and the current fought her, but she didn't let go. She dragged him toward the edge, her muscles screaming, the ice splintering beneath her. When she got him to solid ground, she hauled him up onto the bank and wrapped him in her coat. "I got you," she said. "You're okay." He was shaking so hard his teeth rattled. Mara picked him up, all 80 pounds of him, and carried him back to the cabin. Garrick met her halfway, his face white. "What happened?" "He fell through. He's freezing." Garrick took Ben from her and ran. By the time Mara got back to the cabin, he had the boy stripped down and wrapped in blankets by the fire. Nora was rubbing his hands and feet, trying to get the circulation back. "Is he going to be okay?" Mara asked. "He will be," Garrick said. "Thanks to you." Eli looked at her with something new in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or the beginning of it. That night, after Ben had fallen asleep, Garrick came to where Mara was sitting by the fire. "You saved his life today," he said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." "No, most people would have hesitated. You didn't." She looked at her hands. They were still shaking. "I couldn't let him die." "I know. That's why you're here." He walked away before she could ask what he meant. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher, and the days grew shorter. Mara learned to bake bread, to mend clothes, to chop wood without taking off her fingers. She learned the rhythms of the cabin, when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to push and when to step back. Nora stopped glaring at her quite so much. Eli started asking her questions about where she came from, what her life had been like before. Ben followed her everywhere, chattering about everything and nothing. And Garrick watched. She felt his eyes on her when she worked, when she trained, when she sat by the fire at night. Not in the way men usually watched her, with contempt or hunger or disgust. This was different. He was measuring her, testing her, trying to figure out what she was made of. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, he sat down across from her at the table. "You've done good here," he said. "Thank you. The kids like you. Even Nora, though she won't admit it. She's protecting them. I understand that." Garrick nodded slowly. "Their mother died in childbirth, fourth baby. Didn't make it through the night. I buried them both up on the ridge." Mara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. It was 4 years ago, but the kids remember. They remember what it was like to lose someone. So when I brought you here, they thought I was trying to replace her. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I know. That's why it's working." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. "There's something you should know," he said, "about why I really bought you." Mara's stomach dropped. Here it was. The truth she'd been waiting for. "That man in the saloon, Hale, he's been trying to buy my land for 3 years. He wants the mineral rights, the timber, the water. I told him no, so he started making trouble, threatening my buyers, burning my traps. I knew it was only a matter of time before he came after something I couldn't replace. The kids. The kids. So when I heard he was about to buy some girl to work in his house, I figured that would give him one less reason to come up here. And it gave you a way out." Mara stared at him. "You bought me to protect your family?" "I bought you because you needed help and I could give it. Everything else is just coincidence." "You paid a fortune? It's gold. There's more where that came from, but there's only one of you." He walked back to his bed and lay down, and within minutes his breathing had evened out into sleep. Mara sat by the fire for a long time, watching the flames. She'd spent her whole life believing she was a burden, something to be tolerated at best, discarded at worst. But Garrick had looked at her and seen something worth protecting. Maybe she could learn to see it too. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and muddy trails. The creek swelled with runoff, and the first green shoots pushed up through the earth. Mara had been at the cabin for 3 months, and she'd changed in ways she couldn't quite name. Her body was harder, her hands calloused and strong. She could shoot, hunt, skin game, chop wood. She could read the weather by the clouds and track animals by their prints in the mud. But more than that, she'd changed inside. The shame she'd carried for so long had started to crack and fall away, like ice melting in the sun. One morning, Garrick asked her to ride out with him to check the north trap line. It was a full day's trip, and they left before dawn. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through pine forests and across rocky ridges. Mara's horse, a sturdy mare named Daisy, picked her way carefully over the loose stones. Garrick rode ahead, silent and watchful. They stopped at midday to water the horses at a small spring. Garrick pulled out jerky and hardtack, and they ate in silence. "You ride better now," he said finally. "I've had practice." "You do a lot of things better now." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They checked the traps, 2 rabbits and a fox, and reset them. On the way back, Garrick suddenly pulled his horse to a stop and held up his hand. Mara stopped beside him. "What is it?" "Riders, coming up the trail." She listened and heard it, the sound of hooves on rock, moving fast, too fast for casual travel. Garrick's jaw tightened. "Get behind me." "What's wrong?" "Just do it." She maneuvered Daisy behind his big gray gelding, and a moment later 3 men came around the bend. They wore dusty clothes and had rifles strapped to their saddles. The one in front had a badge pinned to his vest, but it looked wrong somehow. Too shiny, too new. "Garrick Thorne," the man said. He had a thin face and cold eyes. "That's me." "My name's Garrett. I work for Mr. Victor Hale. He'd like a word with you." "I got nothing to say to Hale." "That's unfortunate, because Mr. Hale has something to say to you." "Then he can ride up here and say it himself." Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Hale is a busy man. He sent us instead." "Then I guess you wasted a trip." One of the other men moved his hand toward his rifle. Garrick's hand moved to his own gun, faster. "I wouldn't," Garrick said quietly. The man froze. Garrett looked at Mara and something ugly crossed his face. "That the girl from Callahan's?" "That's none of your business. Mr. Hale paid good money for her. He's not happy you interfered. Hale got his money back. We're square." "No, Mr. Thorne, you're not square. Not by a long shot. Mr. Hale doesn't like being made to look foolish. And he doesn't forget." "Is that a threat?" "It's a friendly warning. Give Mr. Hale what he wants, the land, and there won't be any problems. Keep refusing, and things might get difficult. For you, and for your children." The air went cold. Garrick's hand tightened on his gun. "You go back and tell Hale if he comes near my family, I'll bury him on my mountain. You understand?" Garrett's smile widened. "I'll pass that along, but Mr. Hale doesn't scare easy." "Neither do I." The three men turned their horses and rode back down the trail. Garrick didn't move until they were out of sight. "Garrick?" Mara said quietly. "We need to get back. Now." They rode hard the rest of the way, pushing the horses faster than was safe. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting and Mara's thighs ached from gripping the saddle. Eli met them at the door, his face tight. "We had visitors." "I know. We ran into them on the trail. They came here first, poked around, asked questions, scared Ben." Garrick's jaw worked. "Everyone okay?" "Yeah, but Pa, what's going on?" "Same thing that's been going on. Hale wants the land and he's running out of patience." "So what do we do?" Garrick looked at his son, and for the first time Mara saw something like fear in his eyes. Not for himself, for them. "We get ready," he said. That night, after dinner, Garrick pulled out a map and spread it on the table. It showed the mountain, the cabin, the trails, the ridges. "If they come," he said, "they'll come from here." He pointed to the main trail. "It's the only route up that's wide enough for horses. We block that. We slow them down." "How do we block it?" Eli asked. "Rock slide. We rig the canyon with charges. If we need to, we bring the whole thing down." "That's dangerous," Nora said. "So is letting Hale's men walk right up to our door." Mara looked at the map, at the narrow canyon pass that was their only real defense. "What about the back trails?" "Too steep. They'd have to come on foot, and that gives us the advantage." "And if they do?" "Then we fight." The word hung in the air like smoke. Mara thought about the rifle practice, the shooting, the way Garrick had been preparing her for something. She'd thought it was for wolves or bears. She realized now it had always been for this. "I'll help," she said. Everyone looked at her. "Mara, you don't have to—" Garrick started. "Yes, I do. You brought me here. You gave me a place. I'm not going to let someone take that away." Eli nodded slowly. "She's right. We all fight." "I can shoot too," Nora said, her voice fierce. "No," Garrick said. "You and Ben stay here. Eli, Mara, and I will handle it." "Pa, that's final." Nora's face flushed with anger, but she didn't argue. They spent the next week preparing. Garrick and Eli hauled dynamite up to the canyon, old mining explosives Garrick had traded for years ago, and rigged it along the cliffsides. They reinforced the cabin shutters and stockpiled food and ammunition. Mara practiced shooting until her shoulder was one giant bruise. At night, she lay awake and listened to the wind and wondered if she was ready for what was coming. She didn't know if she was. But she was going to find out. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later. Mara was outside chopping wood when she heard the shots. They echoed through the canyon, sharp and vicious, followed by men's voices shouting. She dropped the axe and ran for the cabin. Garrick was already at the door, rifle in hand. "They're here," he said. "Get inside, bar the door." "What about you?" "I'm going to slow them down. Stay with the kids." He was gone before she could argue. Mara slammed the door and dropped the heavy bar across it. Eli was loading rifles, his hands steady. Nora had been in the corner, her arms around him. "How many?" Eli asked. "I don't know. More than 3. More shots. Closer now. Then an explosion that shook the cabin and sent dust raining from the rafters. "They blew the first charge," Eli said. "Pa must have triggered it. Will it stop them?" "It'll slow them, but not for long." Mara grabbed a rifle and went to the window. Through the narrow gap in the shutters, she could see men on horseback coming up the trail. 6 of them, maybe more. They were spread out, using the trees for cover. Another explosion. This one bigger. The ground shook and she heard the rumble of falling rock. "That's the second charge," Eli said. 2 more left." "Where's your father?" "Up in the rocks. He'll—" A shot punched through the window and the shutter splintered. Mara ducked, her heart hammering. She could hear men shouting, getting closer. Then she saw him. Garrick was pinned down behind a boulder, 3 men closing in on him. He fired twice, dropped one, but the other 2 kept coming. She saw him reload, saw the blood on his shoulder. He was hit. "Eli, your father! I see him!" Eli raised his rifle and fired through the window. One of the men went down, the other dove for cover, but there were more coming, too many. Garrick looked back at the cabin, and even from this distance, Mara could see the decision in his eyes. He was going to trigger the last charges, bury the trail, trap himself on the other side, save them, die alone. "No," Mara said. She grabbed her rifle and ran for the door. "Mara, wait!" Eli shouted. She didn't wait. She threw off the bar, kicked open the door, and ran out into the chaos. Bullets whipped past her, kicking up dirt at her feet. She didn't stop. She ran for the rocks where Garrick was pinned down, her legs pumping, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A man stepped out from behind a tree, raising his rifle. Mara fired without thinking. The gun bucked in her hands and the man went down. She kept running. She reached Garrick just as another man came around the boulder. Garrick's rifle was empty, and the man was grinning, confident. Mara swung her rifle like a club. The stock caught the man in the side of the head with a crack that made her teeth hurt. He dropped like a stone. "What the hell are you doing?" Garrick yelled. Blood ran down his arm, soaking his shirt. "Saving your life. Can you ride?" "I'm fine." "You're shot." "I said I'm fine. We need to get back to the cabin." "No, we need to end this. Now." She looked down at the trail where more men were coming, at the canyon where the last charges waited, at Garrick, bleeding and stubborn and ready to die to protect his family. She thought about everything she'd learned in the last 4 months, how to shoot, how to fight, how to be strong, and she made a choice. "Give me the trigger," she said. "Mara, give it to me." He looked at her, and something passed between them. Understanding, trust. He handed her the detonator. "When I tell you," she said, "you run for the cabin. Don't look back." "What are you going to do?" "What you taught me. I'm going to fight." She stepped out from behind the boulder, fully exposed, and raised her rifle. The men on the trail saw her and started shouting. She fired once, twice, drawing their attention, drawing them in. "Now!" she yelled. Garrick ran. She heard his boots on the rocks, heard him shouting for Eli. She kept firing, kept the men focused on her. They came closer, confident, thinking she was alone. Mara waited until they were in the canyon, until they were packed together in the narrow space between the cliffs. Then she pressed the trigger. The world exploded. The charges went off in sequence, a rolling thunder that shook the mountain to its roots. The cliffs came down in a wave of stone and fire, crashing onto the trail, burying everything beneath. Men screamed, horses screamed, and then there was nothing but dust and silence. Mara stood there, the detonator still in her hand, and watched the mountain reclaim what was hers. When the dust cleared, the trail was gone, just a wall of rock where it used to be. No one was coming up this mountain, not anymore. She turned and walked back to the cabin. Her legs shook and her ears rang, but she kept moving. Garrick was waiting at the door, his face pale, but his eyes steady. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something new in his expression. Not gratitude, not even respect, recognition. "Yeah," he said. "We did." The silence after the explosion was almost worse than the noise. Mara's ears rang so loud she couldn't hear her own breathing. Dust hung in the air like fog, and the smell of burnt powder made her eyes water. Garrett grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the cabin. His grip was iron tight, and she realized he was the only thing keeping her upright. Her legs had turned to water. Eli met them at the door, his face white. "Pa, you're bleeding!" "It's nothing. Get inside." They stumbled through the door and Nora slammed it behind them. Ben was crying in the corner, his hands over his ears. Nora ran to him, wrapping him in her arms. Mara collapsed onto a bench, her whole body shaking. She couldn't stop seeing it. The men in the canyon, the flash of the explosion, the wall of rock coming down. She'd killed them. Maybe 6 men. Maybe more. "Here!" Garrick shoved a cup into her hands. "Whiskey." She drank it in one swallow and nearly choked. "Again," he said, refilling it. She drank again. The liquor burned down her throat and into her stomach, spreading warmth through her limbs. The shaking slowed but didn't stop. Garrick sat down heavily in a chair and peeled off his shirt. The bullet had torn through the meat of his shoulder, missing the bone but leaving a ragged hole that bled steadily. "Eli, get the needle and thread," he said. "I'll do it," Mara said. Her voice sounded strange, distant. "You sure?" "I've sewn before, just not people." "Same principle. Just don't pull too tight." She washed her hands in the basin, her movements automatic. Eli brought the supplies, a curved needle, catgut thread, a bottle of whiskey. Garrick took a long pull from the bottle, then handed it to her. "Pour it on the wound first, clean it out." She did. Garrick's jaw clenched, but he didn't make a sound. The whiskey foamed pink in the wound, and Mara felt her stomach turn. "Now sew." She threaded the needle with fingers that still shook. The first stitch was clumsy, the second better. By the 5th, she'd found a rhythm. Garrick watched her work, his gray eyes steady. "You did good out there," he said quietly. "I killed people. You saved us. That's what matters. Does it get easier?" "No." She finished the stitches and tied off the thread. The wound looked ugly but clean. She wrapped it with strips of cloth torn from an old shirt, binding it tight to slow the bleeding. "Thank you," Garrick said. Mara nodded. She couldn't speak. If she opened her mouth, she was afraid of what would come out. That night, nobody slept. They took turns watching the windows, rifles loaded and ready. Every sound made Mara jump. The wind, a branch scraping the roof, the creak of the cabin settling. She kept expecting to hear hoofbeats, gunfire, men's voices, but nothing came. The mountain was silent. As dawn broke, Garrick stood up and walked to the door. He opened it carefully, rifle ready, and stepped outside. Mara followed him. The trail where the canyon had been was gone. Just a massive pile of rock and debris stretching 50 feet high. Nothing was getting through that. Not men, not horses, not anything. "How long will it hold?" Mara asked. "Long enough. Maybe forever if we're lucky." "And if Hale sends more men?" "Then they'll have to come the long way, through the North Pass. That's a 2-day ride, and it'll give us time to see them coming." He turned to look at her, and she saw the exhaustion in his face. He'd been awake for 36 hours, and the bullet wound was taking its toll. "You should rest," she said. "So should you." "I can't." Neither can I." They stood there in the gray morning light, 2 people who'd just survived something that should have killed them. Mara thought about the girl she'd been 4 months ago, the one who'd stood on that auction block, believing she was worthless. That girl was gone. She'd died somewhere in the canyon with the men who'd tried to take this place. What was left was someone harder, someone who could kill and keep breathing. She wasn't sure if that was better or worse. The days that followed were strange. They moved through the routine of living, cooking, cleaning, tending the animals, but everything felt different, heavier, like the air itself had changed. Ben stopped talking. He'd sit by the fire and stare at nothing, his small hands clenched in his lap. Nora tried to coax him into helping with chores, but he just shook his head and went back to staring. "Give him time," Garrick said. "He saw things a boy shouldn't see." "We all did," Nora said quietly. She was different too. The anger that had always simmered beneath her surface had cooled into something colder. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, efficient and silent. Eli threw himself into work. He chopped enough wood to last 2 winters, repaired the fence 3 times, and hunted every day until dark. Mara understood. He was trying to outrun what had happened, trying to make himself too tired to think. She tried the same thing. She scrubbed the cabin until her knuckles bled, baked bread they didn't need, mended clothes that weren't torn. But at night, when she finally lay down, the memories came anyway. The sound of the explosion, the screams, the silence after. A week passed, then 2. The snow melted completely, and the first wildflowers pushed up through the mud. The mountain came alive with birdsong and the rush of the swollen creek. But the cabin stayed quiet. One morning Garrick saddled his horse and announced he was riding down to town. "You can't," Eli said immediately. "Hale's men." "Hale's men are dead, and he needs to know what happens if he sends more." "Let me go with you." "No, you stay here. Keep everyone safe." Mara stepped forward. "I'm coming." Garrick looked at her. "This isn't your fight anymore." "Like hell it isn't. You're going down there half-healed and planning to walk into Hale's office alone. That's suicide." "She's right, Pa," Eli said. Garrick's jaw worked. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say. No heroics." "Wasn't planning on it." They rode out an hour later. The trail down was muddy and treacherous, and Mara's horse slipped twice before they reached the lower slopes. By the time they got to town, the sun was high and hot. The main street looked the same as it had 4 months ago, dusty, tired, half empty. But when Garrick rode in, people stopped and stared. Whispers followed them like shadows. They tied the horses outside a 2-story building with a sign that read, "Hale Mining and Timber." Garrick checked his rifle, then walked inside. Mara followed, her hand on the pistol at her belt. The office was all dark wood and expensive furniture. A clerk sat at a desk, and when he saw Garrick, his face went pale. "Mr. Thorne, I'll get Mr. Hale." "You do that." The clerk scurried up the stairs. A moment later, Victor Hale appeared at the top. He looked the same as he had in the saloon, slim, well-dressed, with eyes like chips of ice. "Garrick," he said, "I heard you had some trouble." "Is that what you're calling it?" "I'm calling it a tragic accident. My men went up to make you an offer, and the mountain came down on them. Terrible loss." "Your men came to kill me and take my land. The mountain disagreed." Hale descended the stairs slowly, his hand trailing along the polished banister. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I got 6 bodies buried under 1,000 tons of rock. That proof enough?" "Bodies that no one can see. No witnesses. Just your word against mine." "And hers." Garrick nodded at Mara. Hale's eyes flicked to her, and something ugly crossed his face. "Ah, yes, the girl from the auction. I see you're still dragging her around. How domestic." "Watch your mouth." "Or what? You'll bury me under another rock slide? Be careful, Garrick. People might start thinking you're dangerous." "People would be right," Hale smiled. "Here's the situation. You killed 6 of my men. Now, I could go to the sheriff. I could file charges. But I'm a reasonable man, so I'm going to make you an offer instead." "I don't want your offers." "You'll want this one. Sell me the land, all of it. I'll pay you $10,000, twice what it's worth. You take the money, take your children, and leave. Start over somewhere else. Somewhere safe." "That land is mine. My wife is buried there. I'm not selling." "Then you're a fool. Because if you stay, I will take it, one way or another." Garrick stepped forward, and Mara saw his hand move toward his gun. She grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not here." Hale laughed. "Listen to the girl, Garrick. She's smarter than you are." Garrick's whole body was rigid with rage. For a second, Mara thought he might pull the trigger anyway. Then he took a breath and stepped back. "You come near my family again," he said, "and I won't wait for you to make the first move. I'll hunt you down myself. We clear?" "Crystal." Garrick turned and walked out. Mara followed, but at the door she looked back. Hale was watching her with an expression that made her skin crawl. "You made a mistake," he said softly, "choosing him over me." "No," Mara said. "I made the only choice that mattered." Outside, Garrick was already on his horse. Mara mounted and rode after him. They were halfway out of town when she heard someone call her name. She turned and saw a woman standing in front of the general store. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and tired eyes. Mara didn't recognize her. "You're the girl from Callahan's," the woman said. "I was. I work for Hale, in his house." Mara's stomach twisted. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I wanted to tell you something about what's coming." "What do you mean?" The woman glanced around nervously. "Hale's not done. He's hiring more men, not just gunfighters this time, professionals. He's going to wait until you think it's over, and then he's going to hit you when you're not ready." "When?" "I don't know, but soon. He talks about it at night when he's drinking, about how he's going to make an example of Garrick Thorne, how no one says no to him and lives." "Why are you telling me this?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Because you got out, and I can't. But maybe you can stop him. Maybe you can make him pay for what he's done." Mara reached into her pocket and pulled out the only money she had, $3 silver. She handed them to the woman. "Get out if you can. Go anywhere but here." The woman took the money, her hands shaking. "Thank you." Mara rode after Garrick. When she caught up, she told him what the woman had said. His face darkened. "Then we need to be ready." "We can't fight an army, Garrick." "We won't have to. We just need to make it too expensive for him to keep trying." "How do we do that?" "We make him bleed where it hurts. His money." They rode in silence for a while. The sun beat down, and sweat soaked through Mara's shirt. She thought about the woman, about Hale, about the men buried in the canyon. "Garrick," she said finally, "what if we can't win?" "Then we go down fighting, but we don't give up. We never give up." She wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root in her chest, and it was growing. When they got back to the cabin, Eli met them at the door. His face was grim. "We got a problem," he said. "What kind?" "Someone's been watching the cabin. I found tracks up on the ridge, fresh, maybe a day old. They circled around like they were scouting." Garrick swore under his breath. "Show me." They hiked up to the ridge, and Eli pointed out the tracks, boot prints in the soft earth, heading north toward the back trails. "One man," Garrick said, crouching to examine them. "Big, by the look of it. He knows what he's doing, stayed in the trees, kept to the hard ground where he could." "A scout?" "Maybe. Or someone looking for a way in." Mara studied the forest. It looked peaceful, just trees and birds and sunlight, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "We need to set up watches," Garrick said. "Round the clock. No one goes anywhere alone." For the next 2 weeks, they lived like soldiers. Someone was always on watch, always armed, always listening. They set tripwires in the forest, rigged bells to the doors, and kept the rifles loaded. Mara barely slept. When she did, her dreams were filled with explosions and screaming. She'd wake up gasping, her heart pounding, and lie there until dawn. One night she was on watch when she heard something. A sound so faint she almost missed it, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. She grabbed her rifle and moved to the window. A shadow moved through the trees, man-shaped, but too far away to make out details. She watched it circle the cabin, staying just inside the tree line. She should wake Garrick. That was the smart thing to do. Instead, she grabbed her coat and slipped out the back door. The night air was cold and sharp. Mara moved through the darkness, her rifle ready, her eyes scanning the shadows. She'd learned to walk quietly in the last few months, to place her feet carefully and avoid the branches. She found the man standing in a small clearing, looking up at the cabin. He was big, like Eli had said, with broad shoulders and a rifle slung across his back. Mara raised her gun. "Don't move." The man froze. Slowly, he raised his hands. "Turn around." He turned, and Mara's breath caught. He was young, maybe 20, with a face that reminded her of someone. It took her a second to place it. He looked like Garrick. Same dark hair, same gray eyes, same strong jaw. "Who are you?" she demanded. "My name's Cole. Cole Thorne." "Thorne?" "Garrick's my uncle. I came to warn him." "Warn him about what?" "About what's coming. Hale's got 40 men camped 10 miles south. They're waiting for the right moment to move. I heard them talking. They're going to burn you out." Mara's hands tightened on the rifle. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm risking my life being here. Hale hired me to scout. I took his money, but I didn't know it was my uncle's land until I saw him in town today. I'm not going to help kill my own blood." You could be lying. I could be, but I'm not. Look, I don't expect you to trust me, but you need to tell Garrick. Hale's done waiting. He's coming in 3 days, and when he does, he's going to wipe this place off the map. Mara studied the boy. He looked scared, young, nothing like the hardened killers Hale usually hired. Come with me, she said. No, if they see me missing, they'll know something's wrong. Just tell Garrick. Tell him Cole came. He'll understand. The boy turned and disappeared into the trees before Mara could stop him. She ran back to the cabin and burst through the door. Garrick was already awake, gun in hand. What happened? We have 3 days, Mara said. Hale's coming with 40 men. They're going to burn us out. How do you know? Your nephew told me. Cole. He said to tell you he came. Garrick's face went pale. Cole's alive? You know him? He's my brother's boy. I thought he was dead. His whole family was killed in a fire 5 years ago. I tried to find him, but he shook his head. If Cole's here, he's telling the truth. Then what do we do? Garrick looked around the cabin, at his children sleeping in their beds, at the home he'd built with his own hands, at Mara, standing there with her rifle and her mud-stained boots and her fierce, frightened eyes. We fight, he said, but not here. We can't defend this place against 40 men. Then where? We make them come to us, on our terms, in a place where numbers don't matter. The North Pass. The North Pass. It's narrow enough that they'll have to come single file. We can hold it with 5 people if we're smart. We only have 4. No, we have 5. You, me, Eli, Nora, and Cole, if he'll help. You'd trust him after all this time? He's family, and he came to warn us. That's enough. Eli stirred in his bed and sat up. What's going on? We're leaving, Garrick said. In an hour. Pack what you can carry. We're going to the North Ridge. For how long? Until this is over. They moved fast. Garrick and Eli loaded packs with food, ammunition, blankets, and medical supplies. Nora woke Ben and got him dressed. Mara gathered the rifles and pistols, checking each one, making sure they were loaded and ready. By the time the sun rose, they were gone. The cabin stood empty behind them, and Mara wondered if they'd ever see it again. The hike to the North Ridge took all day. They climbed steep trails that made Mara's legs burn and her lungs ache. Ben struggled, and Garrick ended up carrying him on his shoulders for the last mile. The ridge was a natural fortress, a narrow spine of rock with cliffs on both sides and only one way up. At the top was a shallow cave just big enough for 5 people to shelter in. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. They made camp as the sun set. Garrick built a small fire, shielded from view by the rocks, and they ate dried meat and hard biscuits. Nobody talked much. There wasn't much to say. That night, Mara took first watch. She sat at the mouth of the cave with her rifle across her knees and watched the darkness. Somewhere out there, 40 men were getting ready to kill them. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd believed she was worthless, who'd let men mock her and use her and throw her away. That girl would have run, would have found somewhere to hide and prayed it was enough. But Mara wasn't that girl anymore. She'd learned to fight, to shoot, to stand her ground when everything in her screamed to flee. She'd learned what she was worth, and she wasn't giving it up without a fight. Garrick came and sat beside her around midnight. His shoulder was healing, but she could see the pain in the way he moved. You should be sleeping, she said. Can't. Mine won't stop. Mine either. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. The night was cold and clear, and Mara could see her breath. I'm sorry, Garrick said finally. For what? For bringing you into this. I thought I was saving you. Turns out I just dragged you into a war. You did save me. From Hale. From my father. From a life that would have killed me eventually. And now you might die anyway. Maybe. But at least I'll die fighting for something that matters. That's more than I ever had before. Garrick looked at her, and in the starlight his eyes were soft. You're not the girl I bought in that saloon. No, I'm not. You're stronger than I ever expected, braver too. I had a good teacher? He smiled, a rare expression that changed his whole face. We're going to make it through this. All of us. You sound pretty sure. I have to be. Otherwise, what's the point? Mara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen what was coming. 40 men with guns and fire and hate, against 5 people who were tired and scared and running out of time. The odds weren't good. But then again, the odds had never been good. Not for her. And she was still here. She'd keep being here for as long as she could. The next morning, Cole appeared. He came up the trail alone, his hands raised, his rifle slung across his back. "Don't shoot," he called. "It's me." Garrick stepped out of the cave. "Cole." The 2 men stared at each other across the rocks. 5 years of loss and grief and unanswered questions hung between them. Then Garrick crossed the distance and pulled the boy into a fierce hug. "I thought you were dead," he said, his voice rough. "Almost was. But I'm here now." "Why'd you come?" "Because you're family, and because what Hale's doing is wrong. I won't be part of it." Garrick stepped back, his hands on Cole's shoulders. "You know what you're risking?" "Yeah, I know. But some things are worth dying for." "Then welcome to the war." Cole looked around at the ridge, at Eli and Nora and Ben and Mara. His eyes lingered on her. "You're the girl from the saloon," he said. "I was." "Cole, this is Mara," Garrick said. "She saved my life, saved all our lives." Cole nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad to fight beside you." They spent the day preparing. Cole showed them where Hale's men were camped and how they were planning to approach. He drew maps in the dirt, pointing out weak spots and strategic positions. "They're going to split into 3 groups," he said. "One comes straight up the main trail. The other 2 circle around from the east and west. They're planning to hit you from all sides at once." "How long do we have?" "Tomorrow at dawn, maybe earlier if they get impatient." Garrick studied the map. "We can't defend 3 approaches. We need to force them onto one path." "How?" "We collapse the east and west trails. Rock slides. Same thing we did in the canyon." "We don't have enough explosives," Eli said. "We don't need explosives. Just leverage. Those trails are already unstable. We start a slide manually, and gravity does the rest." They worked through the night. Garrick and Cole rigged the eastern trail with ropes and pulleys, using the weight of one boulder to pull down others. Eli and Mara did the same on the western approach. It was brutal work, and by the time they finished, Mara's hands were raw and bleeding. But it was done. When Hale's men came, they'd have only one way up, and Garrick would be waiting. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Mara took her position behind an outcropping of rock. Her rifle was loaded, her pistol ready at her belt. Cole was 20 feet to her left, Eli 20 feet to her right. Garrick and Nora were higher up, with Ben hidden deep in the cave. The waiting was the worst part. Mara's heart pounded in her chest, and sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cold. Every sound made her jump, a bird, the wind, the creak of settling rock. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of men and horses on the trail below. They were coming. Mara's finger rested on the trigger, and she forced herself to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Garrick had taught her. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing off the stone walls of the narrow pass below. She counted them as they came into view. 10 men, then 15, 20. They kept coming, a snake of riders winding up the trail, their rifles glinting in the early light. At the front rode a man in a black coat, not Hale, but someone who carried himself like he owned the world. "That's Garrett," Cole whispered from his position. Hale's right hand, the one who does his dirty work. Garrett raised his hand and the column stopped. The silence was sudden and complete. He stood in his stirrups, scanning the rocks above with eyes that missed nothing. "Thorn!" His voice carried easily in the thin air. "We know you're up there. Mr. Hale sent me to make one final offer. Come down now, sign over the land, and we let you walk away. You and the children. No one else has to die." Garrick's voice came from somewhere above Mara. "Tell Hale he can go to hell." Garrett sighed like a man who'd expected that answer. "That's unfortunate, really, because now I have to do this the hard way, and frankly, I'm tired of climbing mountains." He gestured, and 10 men dismounted. They spread out, moving toward the rocks with weapons ready. The rest stayed mounted, waiting. "They're testing us," Cole said quietly. "Seeing where we are, how many guns we got." "Should we fire?" "Not yet. Let them get closer. Make every shot count." The men advanced carefully, using the sparse cover. They were professionals. Mara could see it in the way they moved, covering each other, never exposing themselves for long. Not like the men at the canyon who'd charged ahead confident in their numbers. One of them got within 30 yards of Mara's position. She could see his face now, hard and weathered, with a scar running down his cheek. He was looking right at the rocks where she hid, and for a terrible moment she thought he could see her. A shot cracked from above. The man dropped. Chaos erupted. The other men dove for cover, returning fire wildly. Bullets ricocheted off stone, whining through the air. Mara pressed herself flat against the rock, her heart hammering. "Now!" Garrick shouted. Mara raised her rifle and fired at a man trying to scramble up the slope. She missed, fired again. This time he went down, clutching his leg. She reloaded with shaking hands, the mechanism that had become second nature now feeling foreign and clumsy. Cole and Eli were firing too, the crack of their rifles punctuating the chaos. 3 more men fell. The rest retreated down the trail, dragging their wounded with them. "Cease fire!" Garrick called. The silence that followed was broken only by the moans of the wounded man Mara had shot. He was crawling back toward the others, leaving a trail of blood on the rocks. No one went to help him. Garrett sat on his horse, watching. Even from this distance, Mara could see the calculation in his eyes. He'd learned what he needed to know: how many defenders, where they were positioned, how good their aim was. "Pull them back," he called. "Set up camp at the bottom. We wait them out." "Wait them out?" one of his men protested. "There's 5 of them and 40 of us. And this is their ground. They know every rock, every angle. We charge up there now. We lose 20 men taking it. I'm not interested in dying for Hale's vanity. We'll starve them out instead." The men retreated down the trail. Within an hour, Mara could see smoke rising from their camp below. They were settling in for a siege. Garrett climbed down from his position and gathered everyone in the cave. His face was grim. "How much food do we have?" he asked. Nora counted the packs. 4 days, maybe 5 if we ration hard. "Water?" "There's a spring about 100 yards down the back trail, but we'd have to go out in the open to get to it. Then we go at night, 1 person at a time." "What if they rush us?" Eli asked. "We can't hold them off forever." "We don't have to hold them off forever. Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" Garrick pulled out a piece of paper and a stub of pencil. He wrote quickly, then folded it and handed it to Cole. "You're going to sneak out tonight and ride to Fort Bridger. There's a marshal there, Sam Whitmore. Give him this letter. Tell him what Hale's doing." "That's 3 days' ride," Cole said. "Then you better ride fast. We'll hold until you get back. And if I don't make it, then we die up here. But at least we die fighting." Cole tucked the letter inside his shirt. "I'll make it." They spent the day watching the camp below. The men had settled in comfortably, too comfortably. They had tents, supplies, even a cook fire. They weren't planning to leave anytime soon. As the sun set, Mara helped Nora prepare what passed for dinner: dried venison, hardtack, and water from their dwindling supply. Ben picked at his food, his eyes too big in his thin face. "I'm scared," he said quietly. Nora put her arm around him. "I know, me too. Are we going to die?" The question hung in the air. Nora looked at Mara, and Mara saw her own fear reflected there. "No," Mara said firmly. "We're not going to die. We're going to fight, and we're going to win, and then we're going home." "How do you know?" "Because your father is the toughest man on this mountain, and he didn't raise quitters, right?" Ben nodded slowly. "Right. So eat your dinner and get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." That night, Cole prepared to leave. He stripped down to dark clothes, took only a knife and a canteen, and waited until the moon had set. Garrick walked him to the edge of the cave. "The back trail's going to be tricky in the dark," Garrick said. "Watch for loose rock about halfway down, and if they catch you, they won't. But if they do, don't tell them where we are. Don't tell them about the marshal. Just run." Cole gripped his uncle's hand. "I'll see you in 3 days." Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness like smoke. Mara watched him go and felt something cold settle in her stomach. 3 days. They had to hold for 3 days. She wasn't sure they could. The next morning dawned gray and cold. Mist clung to the mountainside, turning everything ghostly. Mara took her position behind the rocks and peered down at the camp, The men were stirring, building up the fire, passing around coffee. Then she saw movement on the trail. Not the main approach. The eastern one. The one they'd rigged to collapse. "Garrick!" she called. "They're trying the east trail." He moved to where he could see. A dozen men were picking their way up the unstable slope, testing each step. They'd sent climbers, men who knew how to move on treacherous ground. "Let them get halfway," Garrick said. "Then Eli pulls the rope." They watched the men climb. Slow, careful, bunched together for safety. When they reached the midpoint, Garrick nodded to Eli. Eli pulled. The rope went taut, and the carefully balanced boulder at the top of the trail shifted. Then fell. It hit the slope and started a chain reaction, rocks tumbling, earth sliding, everything giving way at once. The men on the trail had 1 second to realize what was happening before the mountain swallowed them. The roar was deafening. Dust billowed up, obscuring everything. When it cleared, the eastern trail was gone. Just a raw scar on the mountainside and a pile of debris at the bottom. Mara couldn't see any bodies. She didn't want to. A shout from below, angry, panicked. The men in camp were running around, pointing at the rock slide. Garrett stood in the center of it all, his face twisted with rage. "Try the west trail," he bellowed. "Move!" 15 men broke off and headed for the western approach. Garrick watched them go, then looked at Mara. "Your turn," he said. "When they're far enough up, you pull." Mara's hands were sweating. She wiped them on her pants and gripped the rope Garrick had rigged. It was heavier than she'd expected, the rough hemp cutting into her palms. The men climbed. They were more cautious this time, spreading out, watching for traps. But they didn't see the rope hidden in the rocks above them, didn't see the precarious boulder that was the keystone holding everything in place. "Now," Garrick said. Mara pulled. The rope didn't budge. She pulled harder, throwing all her weight into it. The rope stretched but held. "It stuck." "Pull harder." She braced her feet and hauled with everything she had. Her muscles screamed. The rope cut deep into her hands, drawing blood. And then something gave way. Not the boulder, but her grip. She fell backward, landing hard on the rock. The men on the trail were 3/4 of the way up now. Close enough that Mara could see their faces, close enough to start shooting. Eli dove for the rope and pulled. This time it gave, and the boulder shifted. The men saw it and started running. Up, down, anywhere. But there was nowhere to go. The slide caught them and swept them away like leaves in a flood. Mara lay on the ground, staring at the sky, her hands bleeding and useless. She'd almost failed, almost gotten them all killed. "You okay?" Garrick asked, pulling her up. "My hands? Let me see." He examined them, his face tight. The rope had torn the skin open, and blood dripped from both palms. "Nora, bring the medical kit." "I'm fine," Mara said, but her voice shook. "You're not fine. You need stitches." "We don't have time. We make time." He wrapped her hands in clean cloth soaked with whiskey. The pain was blinding, but she bit down on a piece of leather and didn't make a sound. When he finished, her hands were clumsy mittens of bandage, but at least the bleeding had stopped. "Can you still shoot?" he asked. She picked up her rifle. Her grip was weak and the gun felt wrong in her hands, but she could hold it. "Yeah, I can shoot." The day dragged on. The men below didn't try to climb again. They just waited and watched and occasionally fired shots up at the ridge. The bullets came nowhere close, but they kept everyone's nerves raw. By afternoon, Mara's hands were throbbing. By evening, they felt like they were on fire. She took a tiny sip from their whiskey supply and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Nora sat beside her in the dark. "Does it hurt bad?" "I've had worse." "You're lying." Mara almost smiled. "Yeah, I'm lying." "I hated you when Pa brought you home," Nora said quietly. "I thought you were trying to replace Mama. Thought you'd leave as soon as things got hard. I should have left. Would have been smarter. But you didn't. You stayed. Even when it got dangerous, you stayed. That means something. Your mother must have been something special, for your father to love her like he did. She was strong, not like you're strong. She was small, couldn't shoot worth a damn. But she was strong in here." Nora tapped her chest. Nothing broke her. Not the winters, not the hunger, not losing 3 babies before Ben finally came. She just kept going. "Sounds like someone else I know." Nora looked at her, and in the darkness, Mara saw tears in the girl's eyes. I'm so tired of being strong. Me too. They sat together in silence, two women who'd learned that strength wasn't something you chose. It was something that got forced on you, and you either carried it or you died. The second day was worse. The men below were getting impatient, and they started probing the defenses. Small groups would rush up the trail, fire a few shots, then retreat. It wasn't a real attack, just harassment, designed to keep the defenders awake and on edge. It worked. By midnight, everyone was exhausted. Eyes burned from staring into darkness. Hands shook from adrenaline that had nowhere to go. Ben had stopped talking entirely, and even Eli's steady calm was starting to crack. How much longer? He asked his father. Cole's been gone 36 hours. Call it another 36 before he gets back with help. If he gets back. And if he doesn't? Garrick didn't answer. On the third day, Mara was on watch when she saw something that made her blood run cold. The men below were building something, a long wooden frame with wheels covered in wet hides. What is that? She asked. Garrick took one look and swore. It's a siege tower. They're going to wheel it up the trail and use it for cover. Once they get close enough, they'll swarm us. How long do we have? They're working fast. Maybe 6 hours. Maybe less. And Cole? Still a day out, at least. Eli stood up, his rifle in his hands. Then we end this now. We go down there and burn that thing before they finish it. That's suicide, Nora said. Staying up here is suicide too. At least this way we go out fighting. Garrick looked at his son, and Mara saw the war in his eyes. The need to protect versus the knowledge that sometimes the only way to protect was to attack. No, Mara said. Everyone turned to look at her. I'll go, she said, alone, in the dark. They won't expect one person. You can barely hold a gun with those hands, Garrick said. I don't need a gun, just a torch and a clear path. This is insane. So is everything else we've done, but it's worked so far. She could see him struggling with it, could see the part of him that wanted to say no, to keep her safe, warring with the part that knew she was right. If you do this, he said finally, you do it my way. You take Eli with you. 2 people have a better chance than 1. Pa, Eli started. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. Mara looked at Eli. He nodded once, sharp and certain. We leave after dark, she said. The hours until sunset felt like days. Mara tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She went over the plan again and again, down the back trail, circle around through the forest, come up on the camp from behind, set the tower on fire, get out before anyone knew what happened. Simple, except for the 40 armed men between them and success. As the sun dipped below the mountains, Garrick pulled her aside. His face was shadowed, hard to read. I should be going with you, he said. You're needed here, to lead, to protect Nora and Ben. If something happens, then something happens. But it won't. I'm too stubborn to die. He reached out and touched her face, his calloused hand gentle against her cheek. It was the first time he'd touched her like that, not pulling her to safety, not teaching her something, just touching her because he wanted to. You're the bravest person I know, he said quietly. I'm terrified. That's what makes you brave. They held each other's eyes for a long moment. Then Garrick stepped back and the moment was gone. Be careful, he said. Always. She and Eli started down the back trail as full dark settled over the mountain. The path was treacherous, even in daylight. In darkness, it was nearly impossible. Mara's bandaged hands made everything harder. She couldn't grip properly, couldn't catch herself when she slipped. Twice she nearly fell, and Eli had to grab her. You good? He whispered. Yeah, keep going. It took them an hour to reach the bottom. By then, Mara's legs were shaking and sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cold. They moved through the forest like ghosts, using the trees for cover, avoiding the moonlight that filtered through the branches. The camp came into view, tents scattered around a central fire, men drinking and playing cards. The siege tower stood at the edge, half-finished, guarded by 2 men who looked bored and cold. Eli handed Mara a torch wrapped in cloth soaked in pitch. He had one too. They'd light them at the last second and throw them at the tower from 2 different sides. Increase the chance that at least one would catch. They crept closer, 50 feet, 40, 30. One of the guards turned and looked right at them. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the guard opened his mouth to shout, and Eli threw his knife. It caught the man in the throat, and he went down without a sound. The other guard spun, reaching for his gun. Mara didn't think. She just ran at him, swinging her torch like a club. The unlit wood caught him across the face, and he staggered. Eli was on him a second later, his hand over the man's mouth, his knife moving quick and efficient. "Light it," Eli hissed. "Now!" Mara fumbled with the flint and steel, her bandaged hands clumsy and slow. The first strike missed. The second. On the third, a spark caught, and the pitch-soaked cloth burst into flame. She threw the torch at the tower. It arced through the air and landed on the wet hide covering. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then flames licked up the side, catching on the dry wood beneath. Eli threw his torch from the other side. The fire spread fast, climbing the structure like it was alive. Someone in the camp shouted. Then everyone was shouting. Men poured out of the tents, grabbing buckets, running toward the tower. "Go!" Eli grabbed Mara's arm and pulled her back into the trees. They ran. Behind them, the fire roared and men screamed orders. Shots rang out, but they were wild, panicked. Nobody knew where the attack had come from. They were halfway back to the trail when Mara heard it, hoofbeats coming fast. She looked back and saw riders, at least 10 of them, torches held high, searching the forest. "They're tracking us," she gasped. "We'll lose them in the rocks. Come on!" But her legs were giving out. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. The hoofbeats were getting closer. Eli stopped and grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me. You keep going. I'll draw them off." "No. This isn't a discussion. Get back to the ridge. Tell Pa—" His voice broke. "Tell him I tried." "Eli, don't do this." He pushed her toward the trail and ran the opposite direction, yelling and firing his pistol into the air. The riders changed course, chasing the noise. Mara wanted to follow him, wanted to fight beside him. But she knew it would be pointless. He'd made his choice. Now she had to make hers. She climbed. Her hands screamed with every grip, and her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Above her, she could see the ridge, could see the entrance to the cave. Almost there. A shot rang out behind her, and rock exploded inches from her head. She looked back and saw a single rider coming up the trail, his rifle raised. She had no gun, no knife, nothing but her body and her will to survive. The rider fired again. The bullet went wide. He was too close to miss a third time. Then a shot came from above, and the rider toppled from his horse. Mara looked up and saw Garrick standing at the edge of the rocks, his rifle still raised. "Move!" he shouted. She moved. She hauled herself up the last stretch of trail and collapsed at his feet, gasping. "Eli," she managed. "He drew them off. I know, I saw. We have to go back for him. We can't. If we leave the ridge, they'll take it, and then we're all dead." Mara wanted to scream, wanted to rage at the injustice of it. Eli was down there somewhere, alone, facing 10 armed men, and they were just going to let him die. But she knew Garrick was right. They couldn't save everyone. Sometimes you had to choose who lived and who died. She hated it. But knowing it was necessary didn't make it hurt any less. They waited through the night, listening for gunshots, for screams, for any sign of what had happened. But the forest stayed quiet. As dawn broke, Mara saw the burned remains of the siege tower still smoldering. The camp below was chaos, men packing up, others standing guard, everyone on edge. And tied to a post in the center of the camp was Eli. Alive. Garrick went absolutely still. Mara watched his face drain of color, watched his hands tighten on the rifle until his knuckles went white. For a long moment he didn't breathe. "Pa?" Nora's voice was small, terrified. He didn't answer. He just stared down at his son tied to that post like an animal, and Mara saw something break inside him, something that had held him together through his wife's death, through 4 years of raising children alone, through every hardship this mountain had thrown at him. "They won't kill him," Mara said quickly. "Not yet. They'll use him to make you come down." Garrick's voice was flat, dead. "I know. So we wait for Cole, for the marshal. Cole's not coming. You don't know that. Look at me." He turned, and his eyes were hollow. "Cole's been gone 3 days. If he'd made it to Fort Bridger, help would be here by now. Either he got caught, or he couldn't get through, or the marshal wouldn't come. It doesn't matter which. We're alone. Then what do we do? He looked back down at Eli, and Mara saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The same calculation he'd made 100 times. How to protect his family when there was no good choice. We end this, he said. Today. How? I go down there. I trade myself for Eli. Then you, Nora, and Ben run. Get as far from this mountain as you can and don't look back. That's not a plan. That's suicide. It's the only way to save them. Mara grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. You think Hale will honor a trade? You think Garrett will let Eli walk free once he has you? They'll kill you both and come for us anyway. You know that. Then tell me what else to do. The words came out raw, desperate. Tell me how to save my boy. Mara didn't have an answer. She looked down at the camp, at Eli bound and helpless, at the 30-some men who'd destroy anyone who tried to rescue him. The math was simple and brutal. They couldn't win. But sometimes you didn't need to win. You just needed to change the game. What if we don't trade? She said slowly. What if we give Hale something else he wants more than revenge? There's nothing. The land. We give him the land. Garrick stared at her like she'd lost her mind. That's what this whole thing has been about. We don't surrender. We don't surrender. We bargain. We tell him we'll sign over the mineral rights, the timber, whatever he wants, but only if he lets all of us walk away, free and clear. He'll never agree to that. He might. Think about it. He's lost men, equipment, time. The siege tower's destroyed. We've cost him a fortune already. If we offer him what he actually wants, he might take it just to cut his losses. And if he doesn't, then we're no worse off than we are now. Nora stepped forward. She's right, Pa. At least it's a chance. Garrick looked at his daughter, then back at the camp. Mara could see him weighing it, his pride against his son's life. The land his wife was buried on against the children who were still breathing. It wasn't even close. All right, he said, we try it your way. But I'm the one who goes down there, not you. They'll kill you the second you're in range. Then I wave a white flag. Show I'm coming to talk. Garrick, this isn't up for debate. You've risked enough. This one's mine. He tore a strip of cloth from his shirt and tied it to his rifle barrel. White flag. The universal sign of parley. It felt flimsy and inadequate in his big hands. If this goes wrong, he said to Nora, you take Ben and Mara and you run. Don't wait. Don't look back. Just run. I'm not leaving you. You'll do what I tell you. Understand? Nora's face crumpled, but she nodded. Garrick turned to Mara. Thank you. For everything. For saving Ben. For standing with us. For... His voice caught. For being family when we needed it most. Don't, Mara said. Don't talk like you're already dead. I'm not dead. But I'm a realist. He touched her face again, that same gentle gesture. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. Don't forget that. Then he was walking down the trail before she could stop him, the white flag held high above his head. Mara watched him go, her heart in her throat. She wanted to run after him, to pull him back, to tell him there had to be another way. But there wasn't. They both knew it. Garrick reached the bottom of the trail and kept walking, slow and steady, toward the camp. Men saw him coming and raised their rifles, but the white flag gave them pause. Garrett stepped forward, his hand raised to halt the shooting. That's close enough, Thorne. Garrick stopped about 50 feet from the camp. I'm here to talk. Talk? After you killed 20 of my men? After you burned our equipment? You came to my mountain with guns and fire. I defended what was mine. That's not murder. That's survival. Garrett laughed, a harsh sound that carried in the still air. And now you want to negotiate? Bit late for that. I'm offering you what Hale wanted from the beginning. The land. All of it. Mineral rights, timber rights, water. I'll sign whatever papers you need, but my family walks away. All of them. Including my son. That's a generous offer, except you're in no position to bargain. I've got your boy. In a few hours, I'll have the ridge. And then I'll have everything anyway. Maybe. But you'll lose another 20 men taking that ridge. Maybe more. Is that what Hale's paying you for? To come home with half an army in caskets? Garrett's expression shifted. Mara could see him doing the math, weighing the cost. Besides, Garrett continued, dead men can't sign legal documents. You kill me, you'll spend years in court fighting my claim. This way, it's clean. I sign, you get what you came for, and everyone lives. Except you lose everything. I've already lost everything that mattered. The land's just dirt. Garrett studied him for a long moment. I'll need to send word to Hale, get his approval. How long will that take? A day, maybe 2. I'll wait. But my son comes up to the ridge, now, as a show of good faith. No, the boy stays with me until the papers are signed. That's my show of good faith that you won't run the second I turn my back. Garrick's jaw clenched. If you hurt him, I won't. Not unless you give me a reason. Garrett gestured to one of his men. Bring the boy some food and water and untie him. He's not going anywhere. The man obeyed, and Mara saw Eli sag with relief as the ropes came off. He was bruised and bloody, but alive. That had to be enough for now. Garrick turned and walked back up the trail. When he reached the cave, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. Well? Nora asked. We wait. Garrett's sending word to Hale. If he agrees, we sign the papers and walk away. And Eli? Stays with them until it's done. Pa, we can't. We can and we will. It's the only way to keep him breathing. The next day and a half crawled by like something wounded. They took turns watching the camp, watching Eli, making sure he was still okay. Garrett kept his word. The boy was fed and given water, his wounds tended. But he was still a prisoner, still at the mercy of men who'd killed without hesitation. Mara's hands had started to heal, the bandages coming off to reveal pink, angry scars. She flexed her fingers, testing her grip. Still weak, but better. She could hold a gun if she needed to. She hoped she wouldn't need to. On the afternoon of the second day, a rider came up from the south. He talked with Garrett for a long time, gesturing and pointing. Finally, Garrett nodded and sent the rider away. Then he called up to the ridge. Thorne, Hale agrees to your terms. Come down and sign the papers. Bring the girl with you. We need a witness. Garrick looked at Mara. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. I'm not letting you walk into that alone. If this is a trap, then we both die together. But at least we tried. They walked down the trail side by side. Mara's rifle was slung across her back, and her pistol sat heavy at her belt. She wasn't naive enough to think they'd let her keep them, but having them there made her feel slightly less helpless. Garrett met them at the edge of camp. Weapons, hand them over. Garrett gave up his rifle and pistol without argument. Mara did the same, hating the feeling of being unarmed. Garrett led them to a makeshift table where papers were spread out. Mara recognized them, land deeds, transfer documents, all written in dense legal language she couldn't read. Sign here, Garrett said, pointing. And here, Garrett picked up the pen. His hand hesitated over the paper. Pa, don't, Eli called from where he stood 20 feet away, still guarded. Don't give him what he wants. I'm giving him dirt, son. That's all it is. Just dirt. It's Mama's grave. Your Mama's not in the ground. She's in you, in Nora, in Ben. That's what matters. He signed. The scratch of the pen seemed impossibly loud. When he finished, Garrett took the papers and examined them. Good. Now the witness signs. Mara took the pen. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote her name, or rather, the X that marked her signature. She couldn't write, but Garrett seemed satisfied. There, Garrett said. All legal and binding. Hale now owns this land, and you... He gestured to his men. You're free to leave, just like we agreed. And my son? We'll walk out with you, right now. The guards cut Eli loose and pushed him forward. He stumbled, caught himself, and ran to his father. Garrett caught him in a fierce hug. You okay? Yeah, Pa, I'm okay. Then let's get out of here. They turned to leave, and for one perfect moment, Mara thought it might actually work. Thought they might actually walk away from this alive. Then she heard the click of a rifle being cocked. Not quite yet, Garrett said. Garrett turned slowly. Every gun in camp was now pointed at them. You lied, Garrett said flatly. No, I kept my word. The papers are signed and you're free to leave. But I never said anything about the girl. Mara's blood turned to ice. She's got nothing to do with this, Garrett said. On the contrary, she burned our siege tower. She helped kill my men. And Mr. Hale was very specific about what he wanted done with her. See, he's not a man who forgets being humiliated. And she humiliated him in front of half the territory when she chose you over him. Let her go. Please, she's just... She's the one who matters, Garrett said. The one you bought for a fortune. The one you taught to fight. You love her, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. Garrett didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Garrett smiled. That's what I thought. So here's the real deal. You and the boy walk away, live your lives, but she stays, payment for the trouble she's caused. No, Garrett said. I won't leave her. Then you'll die with her. Your choice. Mara's mind raced. They had no weapons, no cover. 30 guns against 3 unarmed people. There was no way out. Unless, I'll stay, she said. Mara, no. It's okay. She looked at Garrick, memorizing his face. You need to get Eli out of here. Get him back to Nora and Ben. Keep them safe. I'm not abandoning you. You're not abandoning me. You're choosing your children. That's what fathers do. She smiled, and it hurt. You taught me to be strong, to fight. Now I'm using that to save the people I love. Don't take that away from me. Tears filled Garrick's eyes. There has to be another way. There isn't. We both know it. She turned to Garrett. You let them go. Both of them. Right now. And I won't fight. I'll come quietly. Mara, Eli started. Go, she said. Please, just go. Garrett considered, then nodded. Deal. But if Thorne tries anything, I shoot the boy first. He won't, Mara said, looking at Garrick. He's too smart for that. Garrick stood there, torn between every instinct he had. Then Eli grabbed his arm. Pa, we have to go. We can come back for her. No, you can't, Garrett said. You come back and I kill her. You send the law and I kill her. You try anything at all and she dies. The only way she lives is if you leave and never come back, understood? Garrick looked at Mara one last time. I'm sorry. Don't be. You gave me a life worth fighting for. That's more than I ever had before. He turned and walked away, Eli beside him. Mara watched them climb the trail, watched them disappear over the ridge. She didn't let herself cry. Not yet. When they were gone, Garrett grabbed her arm. Tie her up. We ride out in an hour. They bound her wrists behind her back and threw her onto a horse. The camp broke down with military efficiency. Tents packed, supplies loaded, fires extinguished. Within 45 minutes, they were ready to move. Mara looked back at the ridge one last time. Somewhere up there, Garrick was gathering his children, planning what came next. She hoped he'd be smart, hoped he'd take them far away and build a new life. She hoped he wouldn't do something stupid like try to rescue her. The ride to town took most of the day. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting and Mara's wrists were bleeding from the rope. They took her straight to Hale's house, a massive 2-story building on the edge of town, all white paint and fancy shutters. Garrett dragged her inside and threw her into a chair in Hale's study. The room was all dark wood and leather, with a massive desk and shelves full of books Mara couldn't read. Hale was standing at the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. When he turned, his smile was cold. Miss Colton, how delightful to see you again. Mara said nothing. Not so defiant now, are you? Not without your mountain man to protect you. He walked closer, and Mara could smell the whiskey on his breath. I offered you a life here, comfort, safety, and you chose him instead. That was a mistake. The only mistake I made was not shooting you when I had the chance. Hale's hand lashed out, catching her across the face. Her head snapped to the side, and she tasted blood. You don't get to speak to me like that. Not anymore. Your property now, my property, and I'm going to make sure you remember that every single day for the rest of your miserable life. He turned to Garrett. Put her in the basement, chain her. I'll deal with her later. They dragged her down a narrow staircase into a dark, cold space that smelled like mold and rat droppings. There were chains bolted to the wall, and they locked one around her ankle. Comfortable? Garrett asked. Mara didn't answer. She just stared at him until he looked away and left. The door closed. The lock clicked, and Mara was alone in the dark. She sat there for a long time, testing the chain. It was solid iron, the kind you'd use for livestock. The bolt was sunk deep into the stone wall. She wasn't getting out without tools or help, but she wasn't giving up. Garrick had taught her to fight, had taught her that strength wasn't just about muscle. It was about will, about refusing to break no matter what, so she wouldn't break. Not for Hale, not for anyone. She'd find a way out, and when she did, she'd make them all pay. Hours passed, maybe days. It was hard to tell in the darkness. Someone came down occasionally with water and stale bread. Mara ate enough to stay alive and ignored the rest. Her mind kept going back to the ridge, to Garrick and the children. She wondered if they'd made it away safely, wondered if they were thinking about her, wondered if she'd ever see them again. On what she thought was the third day, the door opened and light flooded down the stairs. Mara squinted against it, her eyes burning. Hale descended, carrying a lamp. Behind him came two men she didn't recognize. "Stand up," Hale said. Mara stood, her legs stiff and aching. "I've been thinking about what to do with you. You're too dangerous to keep around, too valuable to waste. So I've made a decision. These gentlemen are businessmen from San Francisco. They run establishments that cater to specific tastes. They've agreed to take you off my hands for a generous price." Mara's stomach turned. She knew what that meant, knew what kind of establishments he was talking about. "When do we leave?" one of the men asked. "Tomorrow morning. The train leaves at dawn." They left, and Mara was alone again. She sat down heavily, her mind racing. Tomorrow. She had until tomorrow to figure something out, but the chain was solid. The walls were stone, and even if she got free, there were guards upstairs. She was trapped. That night, she barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Footsteps overhead, the creak of the house settling, the scratch of rats in the walls. She kept expecting someone to come down, to hurt her, to take away what little dignity she had left. But no one came. As dawn broke, she could tell by the thin line of light under the door, she heard something. Shouting. Gunfire. The sound of horses in the street. Then the door burst open and someone came down the stairs fast. Mara scrambled back against the wall, ready to fight with her bare hands if she had to. But it wasn't Hale. It wasn't Garrett. It was Cole. "Mara, thank God!" He ran to her and started working on the lock with a piece of bent wire. "Cole? What? How?" "No time. We have to go. Now." The lock clicked open, and the chain fell away. Cole grabbed her arm and pulled her up the stairs. The house was chaos. Furniture overturned, windows broken, bodies on the floor. Mara recognized Garrett among them, his eyes staring at nothing. "What happened?" she gasped. "Marshall came. Finally. I brought him and 20 deputies. We've been fighting Hale's men all morning." They burst out onto the street. More bodies. More chaos. And standing in the middle of it all, his rifle in his hands and murder in his eyes, was Garrick. He saw her and went absolutely still. Then he was running, and she was running, and they crashed together in the middle of the street. His arms wrapped around her so tight she couldn't breathe, and she didn't care. "You came back," she sobbed into his chest. "Of course I came back. Did you really think I'd leave you? You were supposed to take the children and run. I got them to safety first. Left them with a family I trust 20 miles north. Then I came back for you. I wasn't going to let Hale have you. Not after everything. The marshal, Cole made it to Fort Bridger after all. Took longer than we thought, but he got through. The marshal's been looking for a reason to go after Hale for years. When Cole told him what happened, he brought an army." Mara looked around at the destruction, at the justice finally being served. "Where's Hale?" "Dead. Tried to run. Marshall shot him off his horse." It was over. After everything, the siege, the fighting, the fear, it was finally over. "The land," Mara said. "You signed it over." "Under duress. The marshal says the contract isn't legal. It's still ours. Still home." Home. The word hit her like a punch. She'd never had a home before, never had a place that was truly hers. Now she did. Garrick pulled back just enough to look at her face. His hand touched her cheek where Hale had hit her, and his expression darkened. "Did he hurt you?" "Nothing I can't survive." "I'm sorry, I should have protected you better." "You protected me the only way you could. You stayed alive. You came back. That's all that matters." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the street with smoke still rising from the buildings and the taste of ash in the air. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was fierce and desperate and real. When they broke apart, Mara was crying. So was Garrick. "Let's go home," he said. "Yeah, let's go home." Garrick's face went white as stone. He stood at the edge of the ridge, staring down at his son tied to that post, and Mara watched something break inside him. His hands gripped the rifle so hard his knuckles went bloodless. Pa, Nora whispered behind them. She'd seen too. We have to get him back. I know. How? Garrick didn't answer. He just kept staring at Eli, who sat slumped against the post with his head down. From this distance, Mara couldn't tell if he was hurt, but he was alive. That was something. Garrett stepped out of a tent and walked to where Eli sat. He said something Mara couldn't hear, then backhanded the boy hard enough to snap his head sideways. Nora made a sound like a wounded animal. I'm going down there, Garrick said. His voice was flat, dead. I'm going to trade myself for him. They'll kill you both, Mara said. Maybe, but I can't leave my son down there. You can and you will. Because if you go down there, Eli dies for nothing. Nora and Ben lose their father and their brother, and Hale wins. Then what do you suggest? Mara looked at the camp, at the men, at Eli tied like bait in a trap. Because that's what he was. They were trying to draw Garrick out, make him do something stupid. We wait, she said. Cole should be back by tonight with the marshal. When he gets here, they'll have to let Eli go or face federal charges. And if Cole doesn't make it, then we fight, but we do it smart, not desperate. Garrick's jaw worked. She could see him struggling with every instinct that screamed at him to save his son, but finally he nodded. We wait. But if they hurt him again, I know. The day crawled by like something wounded. Every minute felt like an hour, and every hour felt like a week. Mara watched the camp below, watched Garrett circle Eli like a buzzard, watched the men take turns guarding him. Around noon, they brought him water, a small mercy that made Mara's chest tighten. They wanted him alive. That meant he was still useful as leverage. Nora couldn't watch. She sat in the back of the cave with Ben, holding him while he cried silently into her shoulder. The boy hadn't spoken in 2 days, and Mara wondered what this was doing to him, what scars he'd carry for the rest of his life. You should eat something, Mara said, offering Nora a piece of jerky. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. And Nora took the jerky, but just held it. What if Cole doesn't come back? He will. How can you be sure? Because he's a thorn, and thorns don't quit. It was a weak comfort, but it was all Mara had to give. She went back to her position and settled in to wait. The afternoon sun beat down, turning the rocks into ovens. Sweat dripped into Mara's eyes, and her bandaged hands throbbed with every heartbeat. She wanted water, but they were down to their last canteen, and it had to last. Around 3 o'clock, movement in the camp caught her attention. A rider was coming up from the south, moving fast. He dismounted and went straight to Garrett, handing him something. A piece of paper. Garrett read it, and even from the ridge, Mara could see the smile that spread across his face. He looked up at the ridge and cupped his hands around his mouth. Thorn, I have a message from Mr. Hale. He's tired of waiting. You have until sunset to come down and surrender. If you don't, we start cutting pieces off your boy. We'll send them up one at a time until you change your mind. Nora gasped. Garrick's face went gray. What do we do? Mara asked. Nothing. It's a bluff. How do you know? Because Hale's a businessman. He doesn't get his hands dirty with torture. He's trying to scare us. It's working. The hours until sunset were the longest of Mara's life. She kept glancing at the sun, watching it sink lower, counting the minutes they had left. Garrick paced the ridge like a caged animal, and Nora sat frozen, staring at nothing. When the sun finally touched the horizon, painting the sky blood red, Garrett walked back to Eli. He pulled a knife from his belt. No, Garrick whispered. Garrett knelt beside Eli and said something. Then he cut the ropes binding the boy's hands and helped him stand. Eli swayed but stayed upright. What's happening? Mara asked. I don't know. Garrett pointed up at the ridge, then pushed Eli forward. The boy started walking toward the trail, limping but moving under his own power. It's a trick, Nora said. It has to be. But Eli kept coming. He made it to the base of the trail and started climbing. No one shot at him. No one tried to stop him. Garrick scrambled down to meet him. Father and son met halfway, and Garrick pulled Eli into his arms. The boy's legs gave out, and they sank to the ground together. Mara kept her rifle trained on the camp, waiting for the trap to spring, but nothing happened. The men just watched as Garrick half-carried Eli back up to the ridge. They got him into the cave and laid him down. His face was bruised and swollen, and his shirt was torn and bloody. But he was breathing, and his eyes were clear. "What happened?" Garrick asked. "Why'd they let you go?" Eli coughed, wincing. "Garrett said Hale's calling off the attack, said the game's not worth the price anymore." "I don't believe it. Neither do I. But he cut me loose, said to tell you this isn't over, just postponed." "Did he say anything else?" "Yeah, he said Cole never made it to Fort Bridger. Said they found him on the road with a broken neck. I'm sorry, Pa." The words hit like a physical blow. Mara felt the hope she'd been carrying for 3 days shatter into pieces. Cole was dead. The marshal wasn't coming. They were alone. Garrick's face went hard as granite. "He's lying, trying to break our spirits." "Maybe. But what if he's not?" No one had an answer for that. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch while Eli rested. Nora cleaned his wounds and wrapped his ribs, which Garrett's men had kicked until something cracked. He'd be healing for weeks, but he'd survive. Mara sat at the cave entrance, watching the camp below. The men were packing up, taking down tents, loading supplies. By midnight, they were gone, just empty ground and the ashes of their fires. "They're really leaving," she said. Garrett came to stand beside her. "Or they want us to think they are." "You think it's a trap?" "Everything's a trap with Hale, but we can't stay up here much longer. We're out of food, almost out of water. Another day and we'll be too weak to defend ourselves anyway." "So what do we do?" He was quiet for a long moment. "We go home. If they're waiting for us, we fight. If not, we rebuild and prepare for the next attack. Because there will be a next attack." They left at dawn, moving slowly because of Eli's injuries. The hike down the mountain took twice as long as it should have, and by the time they reached the cabin, everyone was exhausted. The cabin was untouched. No burned walls, no broken windows, no signs of violence. It sat there in the morning sun like nothing had happened, and the normalcy of it made Mara want to cry. They searched the inside carefully, weapons ready, but found nothing. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it, cold and empty and waiting for them to come home. "I don't understand," Nora said. "Why would Hale just give up?" "He didn't," Garrick said. "He's planning something else, something worse." But the days passed and nothing happened. A week went by, then 2. Life slowly returned to normal. They replanted the garden, repaired the damage from the spring storms, and fell back into the rhythms of survival. Eli healed slowly. His ribs knitted back together, and the bruises faded from purple to green to yellow. But something in his eyes had changed. He was quieter now, more careful, like he was waiting for the next blow to fall. They all were. Mara's hands healed too, though the scars would be with her forever. Thick rope burns across both palms, white against her work-roughened skin. She caught herself staring at them sometimes, remembering the weight of that rope, the sound of the rocks falling, the screams of the men below. One morning in early June, Mara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard hoofbeats. Her heart jumped into her throat, and she grabbed the rifle she now kept within arm's reach at all times. But it wasn't Hale's men. It was a single rider on a gray horse, wearing a badge and a familiar face. Cole. Mara dropped the rifle and ran. Garrick burst out of the cabin, and Nora and Eli weren't far behind. They met Cole as he dismounted, and Garrick pulled him into a crushing embrace. "They said you were dead," Garrick said, his voice rough. "Almost was. They ambushed me on the road, 3 men, killed my horse and damn near killed me. I played dead until they left, then walked the rest of the way to the fort. Took me 5 days. But you made it." "I made it, and I brought help." He gestured down the trail, and Mara saw them. A dozen riders in dark coats, led by a man with steel-gray hair and a marshal's badge. They rode into the clearing and stopped, and the lead rider tipped his hat. "Garrick Thorne?" he asked. "That's me." "Marshal Sam Whitmore. I got your nephew's letter about Victor Hale. Took me a while to get here, but I'm here now. And I have some questions." They spent the afternoon telling the marshal everything. About the auction, about Hale's threats, about the men he'd sent to kill them. The marshal listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. "This is a serious accusation," he said when they finished. "You're claiming one of the territory's wealthiest men tried to have you murdered." "I'm not claiming it," Garrick said. I'm stating it as fact. Do you have proof? I have bodies buried in 2 rock slides and a boy who was beaten and held prisoner. That proof enough? It's a start, but Hale's got lawyers, good ones. He'll say his men acted on their own, that he never authorized violence, without direct evidence tying him to the attacks. Then what was the point of coming here? Garrick's voice was hard. The point is, I'm going to investigate. I'm going to talk to everyone involved, including Hale. And if I find evidence of wrongdoing, I'll file federal charges. But these things take time. We don't have time. The next time he comes after us, we might not survive it. The marshal stood up, his face stern. Then you better hope I find that evidence. In the meantime, you do not take matters into your own hands. You hear me? No vigilante justice, no revenge. You let the law handle this. Garrick didn't answer, which was answer enough. The marshal and his men stayed the night, and in the morning they rode back down the mountain. Cole went with them to give a formal statement at the fort. Before he left, he pulled Mara aside. Take care of them, he said quietly. This isn't over. I know. And watch yourself. Hale's the kind of man who holds grudges. So am I. Cole smiled, a sad expression that made him look older than his years. Yeah, I figured. After they left, the cabin felt too quiet. Mara went about her chores, but her mind was elsewhere. The marshal had talked about evidence and investigations and legal proceedings. All of that took time. And in the meantime, what were they supposed to do? Just wait for Hale to make another move? That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the cabin. Garrick's breathing, the crackle of the dying fire, the wind in the pines. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to someone shaking her shoulder. Garrick stood over her, his face grim in the lamplight. Get dressed, he said quietly. We have a visitor. Mara pulled on her boots and grabbed her rifle. Outside, a woman sat on a horse at the edge of the clearing. Even in the darkness, Mara recognized her, the woman from town, the one who worked in Hale's house. She was covered in blood. Help me, the woman gasped and fell from the saddle. They carried her inside and laid her on the table. The blood was coming from a deep gash across her shoulder, and her face was bruised and swollen. What happened? Garrick demanded. Hale knows about the marshal, the woman said, her words slurred with pain. He's furious. He beat me when he found out I'd talked to you, said I was a traitor. Nora, get the medical supplies, Garrick ordered. While Nora worked to stop the bleeding, the woman kept talking, her voice getting weaker. He's planning something. I heard him talking to Garrett. They're going to burn down the fort, kill the marshal, make it look like an accident. Then there's no one to stop them. When? Mara asked. Tomorrow night. They're leaving at dawn. That's insane. They can't attack a federal fort. Hale's beyond reason now. He's lost men, lost money, lost face. He doesn't care about consequences anymore. He just wants you dead and this whole thing buried. Garrick and Mara looked at each other. The same thought crossed both their faces. We have to warn the marshal, Mara said. It's a full day's ride to the fort, Garrick said. Even if we leave now, we'd barely make it in time. Then we leave now. I'm going with you, Eli said from his bed. No, you're still healing. I'm going. Garrick looked at his son, and Mara saw the argument die in his throat. Eli wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man who'd been beaten and held captive and had earned the right to fight. Fine, but Nora and Ben stay here with the woman. Bar the doors, keep the rifles loaded. Anyone comes near this cabin, you shoot first and ask questions later. They saddled 3 horses and rode out before the sun rose. The trail was familiar now, and they pushed the horses hard. Mara's body ached from the pace, but she didn't complain. Lives were at stake. They reached the fort just as the sun was setting. The marshal was in his office, and when he saw them, he stood up quickly. What's wrong? Garrick told him about Hale's plan. The marshal's face darkened with every word. How reliable is this information? Reliable enough that we rode all day to warn you. The marshal walked to the window and looked out at the fort. If Hale attacks a federal installation, it's an act of treason, but I need proof. I need to catch him in the act. So what do we do? Mara asked. We set a trap. Let him think the fort's vulnerable, then surprise him when he makes his move. They spent the next few hours preparing. The marshal positioned his men around the fort, hidden in the shadows. He made it look like normal night watch. Just a few guards, nothing unusual. But there were sharpshooters on every roof and soldiers behind every wall. Garrick, Mara, and Eli took positions in the stable where they could see the main gate. They waited in the darkness, rifles ready, while the hours crawled by. Around midnight, Mara heard it. The sound of horses, moving slowly, trying to be quiet. She counted at least 20 riders, maybe more. They stopped just outside the ring of firelight from the fort's torches. Hale was with them. She could see a silhouette sitting straight in the saddle, giving orders in a low voice. Beside him was Garrett, and behind them were men carrying torches and oil. "Now," the marshal said quietly. Soldiers poured out of the shadows, surrounding Hale's men on all sides. Rifles pointed at them from every direction, and suddenly the attackers were the ones trapped. "Victor Hale," the marshal called out, stepping into the light. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and attempted arson of a federal installation. Order your men to drop their weapons." For a long moment, nobody moved. Hale sat on his horse, his face twisted with rage, and Mara could see him calculating the odds. Could they fight their way out? Could they run? Then Garrett made the decision for him. He drew his pistol and fired at the marshal. The shot went wide, but it was enough. The soldiers opened fire. The night exploded into chaos. Men screamed and horses reared and gunfire lit up the darkness. Mara fired at a man trying to ride past the stable, and he fell from the saddle. Beside her, Garrick and Eli were firing too, their shots methodical and precise. It was over in less than a minute. Most of Hale's men threw down their weapons and surrendered. A few tried to run and were cut down. And Hale himself sat frozen on his horse, his hands raised, his face pale with shock. Garrett was on the ground, clutching his chest where 3 bullets had found him. He coughed blood and stared up at the sky with dying eyes. The marshal walked to Hale and pulled him from the saddle. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest. You have the right to—" "I know my rights," Hale spat. "You think this is over? I have lawyers, I have money, I have friends in high places. I'll be out in a week." "Maybe," the marshal said, snapping handcuffs on his wrists. "But you'll stand trial first. And every person you've hurt, every life you've ruined, they'll all get to tell their stories, including this woman here." He nodded at Mara, and Hale's eyes went to her. For the first time, she saw something other than arrogance in his face. She saw fear. "You," he said. "This is all your fault. If you just stayed where you belonged." "Where I belonged?" Mara stepped forward until she was inches from his face. "I belonged in a saloon, being sold like cattle. I belonged in your house, being used and broken. No, I belong here, on this mountain, with these people, living free, and there's nothing you can do to change that." Hale opened his mouth to respond, but the marshal dragged him away toward the cells. His men followed, shackled and defeated, their rebellion broken. Mara stood in the firelight and watched them go. Garrick came to stand beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "Is it?" "Hale will stand trial. The evidence is overwhelming. Attempted murder of a federal marshal, arson, conspiracy. He'll hang or spend the rest of his life in prison. And us? We go home. We rebuild. We live." The ride back to the cabin took 2 days because they were in no hurry. They stopped to camp along the way, and for the first time in months, Mara slept without nightmares. The weight she'd been carrying had finally lifted, and she felt lighter than air. When they reached the cabin, Nora and Ben ran out to meet them. Nora threw her arms around her father, and Ben clung to Eli like he'd never let go. The woman from Hale's house stood in the doorway, her arm in a sling, watching them with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Garrett corrected. "You're the one who warned us." "What will happen to me now? I have nowhere to go." "You can stay here," Mara said. "If you want. We could use another pair of hands." The woman, her name was Catherine, Mara learned later, nodded slowly. "I'd like that." The summer passed in a blur of work and healing. They replanted the crops that had been neglected during the siege. They repaired the cabin's roof and reinforced the walls. They hunted and fished and gathered, filling the larder for the winter to come. Mara's hands finished healing, though the scars remained. She wore them like badges now, proof of what she'd survived. Proof that she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had believed. In August, news came from the fort. Hale's trial had lasted 3 weeks, and the jury had deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to hang. Garrick read the letter aloud at dinner, and when he finished, nobody cheered, nobody celebrated. They just sat in silence, feeling the weight of it. "He's really gone," Nora said finally. "Yeah," Garrick said, "he's gone." That night, Mara walked out to the ridge where she'd made her stand all those months ago. The rock slide was still there, a permanent scar on the mountain. She thought about the men buried beneath it, about the lives that had ended because of one man's greed. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Garrick. He came to stand beside her, and they looked out over the valley together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Buying me that night?" "Not once." "Even with everything that happened?" "Especially because of everything that happened. You saved my family, Mara, more than once. You saved me first. Maybe we saved each other." She thought about that, about the girl she'd been, broken and hopeless and convinced she was worthless, and about the woman she'd become, scarred and strong and unafraid. "I used to think my size made me weak," she said quietly. "Made me a burden, something people had to tolerate. And now? Now I think it makes me who I am. All that strength, all that endurance, it was always there. I just needed someone to help me see it." Garrick put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. They stood like that for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one. Months turned into years. Hale was executed on a cold November morning, and his empire crumbled without him. The land he'd claimed was divided up and sold, and Garrick bought back the parcels adjacent to his own property. The mountain was theirs now, truly and completely. Eli grew into a man, tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet determination. He married a girl from town and built his own cabin a mile down the mountain. Nora learned to shoot as well as any man and took over managing the trap lines. Ben, who'd been silent for so long after the siege, found his voice again and became the family storyteller, keeping their history alive. Catherine stayed and became part of the family. She taught Mara to read and write, sitting by the fire on winter nights, patiently sounding out words until they made sense. By the time Mara turned 30, she could read whole books and write letters that didn't embarrass her. And Garrick. He and Mara never spoke about what was between them, never put words to the bond that had been forged in blood and fire. But everyone knew. The way he looked at her, the way she moved to stand beside him without thinking, the way they'd become two parts of the same whole. One spring morning, 5 years after the siege, Mara was working in the garden when she heard a rider coming up the trail. She straightened, her hand going automatically to the rifle that still leaned against the fence. But it was just Cole, now a deputy marshal himself, riding up with a wide grin on his face. "Got news," he called. "What kind?" "The territorial governor is offering land grants to settlers who can prove they've been working their claims for 5 years or more. I put in the paperwork for you and Uncle Garrick. The whole mountain is legally yours now. No one can ever take it away." Mara felt something break loose in her chest, the last piece of fear she'd been carrying. They were safe. They were home. And no one could take that from them ever again. That night, they had a celebration. All the family gathered, Eli and his wife, Nora and her new baby, Ben with his constant stories, Catherine with her quiet smile, Cole with his marshal's badge. They ate and drank and laughed, and the cabin rang with the sound of life. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, Mara sat outside under the stars. Garrick came and sat beside her, and they listened to the night sounds together. "Do you ever think about where you'd be if I hadn't walked into that saloon?" he asked. "Every day. I'd be dead, probably. Or worse. I used to tell myself I did it to help you, to save you from Hale, but that wasn't the whole truth." "No? No, I did it because when I looked at you, I saw someone who'd been beaten down by the world but hadn't broken, someone who had strength they didn't even know about. And I thought, if I could give that person a chance, maybe they'd become something extraordinary." "And did they?" He looked at her, and his eyes were warm in the starlight. "Yeah, they did." Mara took his hand, and they sat there together, two survivors who'd found each other in the darkness and built something that would last. The mountain rose around them, solid and eternal, and the cabin glowed with firelight behind them. She thought about the girl who'd stood on that auction block, convinced she was worthless. About the woman who'd pulled a rope and brought down a mountain. About all the miles between those two moments, paved with pain and blood and hard-won strength. She'd been told all her life that her size made her less than, made her a burden, made her something to be ashamed of. But standing there on that mountain, with calloused hands and rope-burned scars, and a family who loved her, she finally understood the truth. Her size had never been her weakness. It had always been her power. Every pound of her had been strength waiting to be used, endurance waiting to be tested, courage waiting to be claimed. And when the world had tried to break her, she'd stood her ground and fought back. Not because she was perfect, not because she was fearless, but because she'd learned that survival wasn't about being what other people wanted you to be. It was about being exactly who you were, with all your scars and flaws and imperfect strength, and refusing to apologize for it. Stories spread across the frontier in the years that followed. About the woman who'd been sold for a debt and became a legend. About the mountain that had swallowed an army. About the family that had stood against impossible odds and won. The stories got bigger with each telling, the way stories do. But at their heart, they were all true. Mara Colton had been bought for $400 in a filthy saloon on a winter night, and she'd turned that moment of degradation into a foundation for a life that mattered. She'd learned to shoot, to fight, to stand tall when everything in her screamed to run. She'd learned that strength came in all sizes, all shapes, all forms, and that the only person who could define her worth was herself. Years later, when travelers passed through and asked about the woman on the mountain, the locals would smile and tell them the story, about how she'd stood in a canyon with a detonator in her bleeding hands and brought the mountain down on her enemies, about how she'd walked through fire and come out the other side stronger than steel. And if you rode up to that cabin on the ridge and looked carefully, you could still see the scars on the mountain, the rock slides that had saved them, the trails that had been their battlegrounds, the places where ordinary people had done extraordinary things. But mostly, you'd see a home, a place where a family lived and worked and loved, where children grew up strong and safe, where the past was honored but didn't define the future. Mara stood on her porch every morning and watched the sun rise over the peaks, and she never took it for granted. Not the view, not the peace, not the life she'd built from the ashes of the one that had tried to destroy her. She'd been sold as property. She'd become a legend. And in between those two moments, she'd discovered something more valuable than gold or land or victory. She'd discovered who she really was, and that was worth more than anything money could buy.